The movie opens in 1973. Astronauts Ben, Nate, and John were selected to go on a secret Apollo 18 mission to the moon. The missions was sponsored by the Department of Defense, and the astronauts were told they will be installing a new satellite transmitter called the PSD-5. The mission is secret because the US doesn't want Russia to know about the new satellite. It is explained that the PDS-5 will be able to detect ICBM attacks from Russia before it's too late. The three astronauts all have to lie to their family and say they are in a training program in Japan. The astronauts are not happy about this, but this is a great opportunity for them, so they all accept the job. In December 1973, Ben, Nate, and John are launched towards the moon. Ben and Nate will be the ones that will land on the moon, while John manned the spaceship and will pick them up once they are done. Once Ben and Nate land on the moon, they jump around and have fun like overhyped children. They then plant the American flag and then set up the PSD-5 satellite. Finally, they take samples of moon rocks before returning to their ship. That night, Ben and Nate are woken up from their sleep because of some kind of interference. Their power even goes off for a second, and their communication stops working for a few seconds too. They then hear a screeching sound coming from outside the ship. They ask Houston if the interference is coming from them, but they are told there is no issue back on Earth. They then ask if the PSD-5 is causing the interference, and Houston tells them he will check with DoD. Ben and Nate return to sleep, but we see from the cameras of the ship a rock moving outside. The next morning, Houston tells them the interference issue has been fixed and that they continue their work. Ben and Nate then start to get ready and have breakfast, but Ben notices the rock sample he has brought on the floor. He is confused because he put the rock in a plastic bag, but now it's out on its own. He asks Nate if he has touched it, but Nate tells him he hasn't. Both are now extremely confused, but they figured it must have fallen out when they were moving around. They put the rock back into the plastic bag, and they go out for work. They drive the lunar rover to the next location and set up the next transmission. Communication again cuts off. So Nate decides to just look around and investigate what is causing the interference. He finds a recently made impact crater, and when he gets close to it, he finds another footprint. This freaks him up, and he notifies Ben. They then start to follow the footprint, and it leads them to a Russian lunar landing ship. This is surprising since the Russians have never landed on the moon, but it seems like they also had a secret moon mission. Ben and Nate approach the ship and knock the door. They get no response, so they enter. The ship has been trashed, and it looks like some kind of fight happened in it. Ben checks the ship's stat, and it shows it had enough oxygen and fuel to take off. They then see a lot of blood on the floor, so they decide to further investigate. Ben follows the footstep into another impact crater. Nate warns him. The craters are too cold for their suits, but Ben gets in. Ben takes out his flashlight and looks around. He sees a lot of rocks in there, and when he goes in more, he finds a dead Russian astronaut. He drags the astronaut out of the hole, and Nate and Ben investigate his body. The guy's helmet has been broken and his spacesuit ripped. They think he must have been killed by another astronaut, but if that is true, where is the other astronaut? Ben and Nate return to their ship and contact Houston. They tell him about the Russian astronaut, but he doesn't seem surprised. He indirectly tells them that the DoD knew about the Russians, and that might be the reason they sent them too. Later that night, Nate is awakened by another noise. He looks out through his window and notices the American flag they planted is gone. He then wakes Ben up and they contact Houston. They try to tell him what happened, but connection cuts out. They then contact John and they tell him Nate thinks the other Russian astronaut might have taken it, but John tells them that no one can survive that long in a spacesuit. The oxygen will run out in just a few hours, so it shouldn't be possible that another person is running around the moon. They then get patched through the DoD, and the director tells them that they had suspected the Russians had sent astronauts, and intelligence warned them that they might be planting something dangerous on the moon. Nate then asks why the Russians didn't rescue the second astronauts, and the DoD director tells them that the Russians only sent one astronaut. The director then tells them to go back to Earth as they have finished their work. Nate and Ben are not satisfied with the director's answer, but they start getting ready to lift off. As they start up the ship's engine, they hear the noise again. Their communication then fully cuts off, and when they try to lift off, their engine suddenly shuts down. Outside of the window, they see the lunar rover flipped over. Nate thinks maybe a meteor hit them, so he decides to go out and fix the comm system. He goes outside and sees that their ship has been heavily damaged. He doesn't find any debris though, so he is confused what caused the damage. Nate then sees tracks made by something not human. Nate realizes that there might be extraterrestrial life on the moon. He then follows the track and finds the flag which has been torn up. He then fixes the comms antenna, but the connection is still not stable. Suddenly, Nate starts freaking out. He tells Ben something is moving inside his suit, but Ben can't see anything. Ben tells him to get back to the ship. Nate starts freaking out more and says it is in his helmet. We then see something running inside his helmet before it cuts to black. Ben runs out of the ship and finds Nate knocked out. He drags him back into the ship and stabilizes him by giving him oxygen. After Nate is stabilized, Ben starts asking him a question. He tells him he hasn't found anything in his helmet. Nate then says he heard the shrieking noise which made him trip and hit his head on the rocks. Ben then notices Nate is bleeding from his chest, and they take off his suit. Nate has a cut on his chest, and he starts feeling something in his wound. Ben then grabs a tool and removes a moon rock that was inside Nate. The rock doesn't move as he takes it out, but Nate is freaked out, so he breaks the rock using a hammer. They then try to contact Houston again, but communication doesn't work. They sit down to think about the situation, and Ben speculates that the true reason they were sent to the moon to monitor the aliens. He also thinks that the PDS-5s might be the ones causing the interference. In the next few hours, Nate starts developing an infection around his wound, which is quickly spreading all around his body. He is also getting more paranoid and delusional. He figures he's going to die soon and tells Ben to leave him and escape using the Russian ship, but Ben refuses. Nate wakes up in the middle on the night. His eye is turning red, and the infection has grown much larger. He then gets angry at the cameras inside the ships as he thinks he is being watched by the DoD, and he attempts to destroy it, but he accidentally damages the ship, and the ship starts losing oxygen very fast. Ben then decides they should go to the Russian ship, and they get onto the lunar rover. As they are driving to the ship, though, Nate says he doesn't want to go, as he fears he will spread the disease to the rest of the world, and he jumps off the rover. Ben then crashes while trying to stop Nate from jumping. Ben wakes up shortly after and starts looking for Nate. He finds him at the crater where they found the Russian astronaut. Nate tells him that the aliens are surrounding him and that he should leave. Nate then gets dragged into the crater by the aliens. Ben runs after him, but as soon as he gets into the crater, the aliens that were disguised as rocks start growing legs and chase him. Ben manages to run away though, and he makes it to the Russian ship safely. He gets inside and tries to communicate with the Russians at first. He doesn't get a response, but then the DoD director responds and tells him that they know what is happening. He then informs Ben that they won't be sending a team to rescue him because they fear letting the aliens to Earth. Ben tries to explain that only Nate is infected, but the director tells him the decision has been made and informs him that his family will be told that he died a hero. Ben, defeated, sits down and starts listening to a recording of his son. Then suddenly John contacts him and tells him he will rescue him. He tells him to launch the spaceship and he will catch him when he gets into orbit. Ben then starts the ship, but before he can take off, Nate arrives outside of the ship and asks him to let him in. Ben refuses. So Nate starts hitting the ship with his hammer. He almost breaks the window, but before he can, he gets swarmed by the aliens and he gets killed immediately. Ben launches the ship successfully and adjusts his orbit so he can reach John. John is also doing the same, but he gets a call from the director who informs him that Ben is infected and orders him to abort the mission and return to Earth alone. Josh refuses to abort the mission, so the director tells him that if he picks up Ben, he will also not get back to Earth, but Josh ignores the threat and starts flying towards Ben. Meanwhile, in Ben's ship, we see the alien rocks floating as he reaches orbit. They then all attack him, which prevents him from controlling the ship, and he crashes into John's ship, killing them both. In the end screen, we are shown what happened after the astronaut's death. The government lied about how they died and told their families that they died during training. We are also told that the government halted the space program after that, which is the reason why we never went to the moon since. And with that, the movie ends.